Hi guys, Mr. Sonnenberg here. Today what we're going to talk about is blood. Something that some people like, something that some people don't like, but something that we all need. So what is it and why is it important? Now I have a lot of information on these slides. Not going to touch base on everything. Some of it's just FYI, I guess, for you. But the key points we're going to hit. So basically the average adult has about 5 liters of blood living inside their body. Okay, so without blood, our body would stop working. So it's necessary. We need blood. Oops, what did I do? There we go. Okay, so what's the major function of blood? So it's the fluid of life, we call it. So its job is to transport oxygen from the lungs to body tissues. Then what we do is it's supposed to also transfer carbon dioxide from the body tissues to the lungs. Oxygen goes down to my body tissue. Then once that oxygen is used up in the tissue, carbon dioxide moves out. Okay, and then we exhale. Okay, so we inhale oxygen through our lungs, and that actually goes into our bloodstream and it enters through what we call capillaries, and then it enters in the single layered, and so the oxygen can actually make its way into our bloodstream. But then what happens is oxygen moves through. So we have veins or arteries and we have veins, and so we carry the blood throughout that. But the lungs, when we exhale, we're exhaling carbon dioxide. That's because we have to keep our pH down, and we have to release that so we can bring in new oxygen so we can oxygenate our blood. So basically, if we take a look at the percentage of blood, we can see that here that 55% is plasma, and plasma is kind of the straw-colored liquid, and I'll show you a picture as well that'll show you, but straw-colored liquid which blood cells basically to suspend in, so they're floating in that. And so then the other 45 the elements make up these three things. So 1, red blood cells, 2, white blood cells, and 3, platelets. Now red blood cells are going to take up majority of that percentage, so they're going to take up the most, and then these two are going to take up a very tiny little percentage. Okay, so those are the components. So the 4 components of the blood that you're going to want to know are the plasma, the white blood cells and platelets, and the red blood cells. Now the plasma, like I said, is 55%, and you'll see that it's kind of the liquid, right? So all this other stuff, it basically is going to suspend in the liquid. So now this is showing, almost looks like a density tower right here, right, with the difference. But when mixed together in the blood, this plasma is the fluid that's going to, or the fluid, what is fluid? This is the fluid that's going to carry the red and white blood cells, and then also the platelets. So we notice that these ones right here, these white blood cells and platelets, they're less than 1%. Yeah, 45% here, 55% here. So red blood cells, why are there more of those? Well, because they carry oxygen and collect oxygen in the blood, and referred to hemoglobin and such. So they actually are very large with the surface area, and they have a biconcave shape, and we'll talk about them more in depth as we go through here. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to try to zip through this one as best I can. So plasma. First, let's just talk about the different components. So plasma, it's a relatively clear liquid comprised of liquid water, sugar, fat, protein, and a salt solution, and it's going to carry the red blood cells, it's going to carry the white blood cells, platelets, and then it carries also other chemicals. So if we think about some incidents where we can track pathogens, stuff they attack our cells, sometimes we can get incidents where things get in our blood cells, and then those can cause mutations within our body, but we can also become ill if we have poisoning to our blood. So usually it's about 55% of the blood's volume, and about 95% of this plasma, though, this liquid, is made of water. So the rest of it, the sugars, fats, protein, salt solution, they're about 5% of it or so. Okay, so basically as the heart pumps the blood to the cells throughout the body, the plasma brings nourishment to them and then removes the waste products of metabolism. So when we're burning food in the metabolism and such, it's actually going to get rid of those wastes. So the second component we have to talk about is red blood cells. We also would call them erythrocytes. But red blood cells are, like I said, they have that biconcave shape. So if you take a look here, I'm just going to circle this one right here. Biconcave. Okay, so it's caving inwards. All right, and it does that on both sides. So there's a thin middle, but it actually collects oxygen. Okay, and those red blood cells, and they're large. They have a large surface area compared to the tiny little white blood cells and the platelets. They comprise about 45% of the blood. So, large microscopic nuclei, okay, they're normally, I've talked about that, transport oxygen and stuff, but basically they take it to the tissues, and then their role is to carry away the carbon dioxide so that we can exhale and get it out of our system so we can bring in new oxygen, okay? Now, hemoglobin, I mentioned that word, that's a gas transporting protein molecule, and it takes about 95% of a red cell. So now, each red blood cell has about 270 million iron-rich hemoglobin molecules. So this hemoglobin, the hemoglobin is what collects the oxygen. That's within the red blood cell. Okay, so if you're anemic, generally you have a deficiency of red blood cells. Okay, so we'll talk about that anemia a couple times. And then the color of blood is primarily red because due to oxygenated red blood cells. And oxygenated means that they have oxygen. Oxygen is in the presence, or they're in the presence of oxygen. Now, next component, so this would be the third component, is the white blood cells or the leukocytes. Okay. Now, I just have a little picture of one here, as you can see, but these are really tiny, and along with the platelets, these are going to take up less than 1%, or comprise less than 1% of the blood. But these are extremely small, but they're definitely not limited. They're just small. So basically what they do is they can carry elsewhere in the body as well, not just in blood, but most notably in things like the spleen, the liver, and the lymph glands. But most are produced in the bone marrow from the same kind of stem cells that produce red blood cells, and others are produced in the thymus gland, which is at the base of the neck. Okay. Well, what do? So they're kind of our first responders of the immune system. So we're going to talk about the immune system as well, but what they do is they seek out, they identify, they bind to alien protein on bacteria, viruses, fungi, so that they can be removed. So then other white cells, okay, there's other types of white cells, then they arrive to surround and destroy the alien cells. And we'll talk about that with immunity. So when we talk about immunity and fighting infections, fighting disease and pathogens and such, the white blood cells are the ones that are doing that. The red blood cells are providing us with oxygen, carrying it to our tissues and carrying carbon dioxide and getting it out of our body. But now these white blood cells, even though they have a tiny little percentage in the blood, they have a huge role within our body of being first responders of our immune system, which is what keeps us healthy and fights infection and such. Okay, and they also function in getting rid of dead or dying blood cells and foreign matter. So if we have foreign matter that comes in, these white blood cells, they get rid of it. So things like dust, or if there's dying blood cells, they're the ones that get rid of it. They're like our defenders. Now the last and the fourth one we're going to talk about is platelets. Okay, now platelets, basically what they're going to do is, if you have a cut or if you're bleeding, they're going to cause clots. So that's how our bleeding stops, is it clots, right? So blood clots at the site of a wound are going to be the cause of platelets. They're going to do the clotting and plug it up. So we'll see that crusty clotted blood. That's because platelets are in the blood, and they're going to actually do that. So they do this by adhering to the walls of blood vessels, and basically they plug the rupture of the vascular wall. So there are more than a dozen types of blood clotting factors and platelets that need to interact with blood clotting process, but the main role, and what I really want you to know, is platelets are going to clog, or they're going to clot and prevent us from bleeding out as well, if they can. Okay, so a little bit of information here. They're about a third the size of a red blood cell, so they're tiny. Their lifespan is only 9 to 10 years, and like red and white blood cells, platelets are produced in the bone marrow of stem cells as well. So all three are produced there. So blood's actually alive because it actually has living components in it. So we would say even those white blood cells, they're living, so it's actually alive. So since the cells are alive, they need to be nourished as well. So how do we do that? So what does blood need? Well, it needs vitamins, minerals to keep it healthy. The blood cells have to have a definite life cycle, just as living organisms do. So, like I said, platelets live 9 to 10 years because they're living. We have a life cycle there that occurs. Now, what happens if we have blood loss? So, when a human body loses a little bit of blood through a minor wound, the platelets cause the blood to clot, so that the bleeding stops. Because new blood is always being made inside your bones, the body can replace the blood that's lost. So I lose some blood, I cut my hand, ouch, boom, it's bleeding. Platelets are going to clot it, okay? But I've lost blood. Where does it come back? Well, we're constantly making new blood, so it's going to show up eventually that we made that blood. Now, if there was a blood replacement, I don't know if anyone's ever had that, but I know my uncle has as well. But when the human body loses a lot of blood through a major wound, then that blood has to be replaced through a blood transfusion from another person. So that's why we donate blood. And actually, I had a bad experience donating blood. The nurse was basically yelling at me, saying, after she poked me with the needle, excuse me, sorry, still a little sick, poked me with the needle, and she's like, "Oh, you must not drink water." And I said, "I drink a ton of water. I did drink water." She said, "Well, there's no blood really coming out." Well, she missed my vein. And so, or she missed the artery. And so what actually happened was, or my vein, I guess, but what happened was she went to pull the blood out. It wasn't coming out. So then she had to poke me again. She's like, "Oh, oops, I missed." And she felt bad after, but I was bruised after getting stabbed there a couple times. From here up to here. Oh, it's terrible. So that was my experience donating blood. But blood is necessary for blood transfusions, and it can save people's lives. So we just take a wall. Or take a wall. I just looked at vessel wall and I decided to say that word. Sorry. Anyways, we see some of the components here. So we can assume that the liquid that these would be suspended in. We can see that there's white blood cells and the red blood cells. Notice the biconcave shape again. And then the tiny little platelets. These platelets are clotting. Okay. Red blood cells, oxygen. They carry oxygen and then carbon dioxide. I'll just write CO2. And white blood cells are for fighting infection. So there are fighters. Okay. Okay, so if we look at blood typing, okay, so this is, you're going to want to know this for your post-assessment, but if you have a certain blood type, so I'm A positive, and I remember my mom sent me a text the other, I don't know, it was probably a month ago. I said, or not even, what am I talking about? Maybe 6 months ago. And she said, I said, "What blood type am I?" I said, "I didn't know." And she said, "You're A positive." And I said, "Oh, shoot, that's the first A plus I've ever had in my life." But of course I was joking, but she thought I was kind of a dummy for saying that. So she always laughs at my jokes. Let's say that much. No, I'm just joking. She doesn't. Anyway, so if you're O positive, you can receive either O positive or O negative blood. If you're O negative, you can only receive O negative. A positive, you can receive A positive, A negative, O positive, or O negative. So that's what I can. So if somebody was A positive, A negative, I could receive blood and a blood transfusion from them. If I was O positive or O negative, I could get blood from them as well. Or A negative or A minus, A negative, sorry, you can receive from A negative or O negative. And then from B positive, and I know maybe this sounds confusing, but pause this and look at this chart because you're going to want to know it, okay? And then B positive, and you can receive from B positive, B negative, O positive, and O negative. And then B negative is only B negative and O negative. But then look at this AB positive. AB positive can take and receive blood from anyone who is AB positive, AB negative, O positive, O negative, A positive, A negative, B positive, B negative. Universal, can take from everyone. Okay, and then AB negative. AB negative can receive from AB negative, O negative, A negative, B negative. Notice that they're all negative in that AB negative. But that AB positive is our universal recipient, can receive from everybody. So if you're AB positive, then you're looking good there because you can receive from anybody. It's easy to find a blood donor. O positive or O negative. O negative is very rare, right? So anyways, you're going to want to know these for your post-assessment. And so basically what I've done is on a link, I've posted a blood typing game. Now, it'd be interesting for you to ask your parents what blood type you are. Take a look at that chart and then see who you could donate blood with. And what we'll actually look at is if we can get everybody's blood type, then we could actually look at that chart and say, hey, yo, you could actually, I could receive blood from you, or I could give you blood. And so knowing that if you ever were to donate blood, it could maybe someone, your best friend in your class you didn't even know, your blood might be able to help them one day. Who knows? Anyways, you can check that link out. You can't click on it on the screencast, but you could copy and paste it, and you can put it in. And there's a little blood typing game for you to practice your skills, because if you want to know that, right? Anyways, this is blood components. I hope this has helped. Again, you can play, pause, rewind these screencasts. Use them to answer questions on your post-assessments. And hopefully this is helpful. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. Okay, bye.